Vagrant. That's what he called me, his voice echoing across the pristine sand of La Jolla Cove for everyone to hear. Marcus Thorne, the wealthy third-generation president of the exclusive La Jolla Swim Club, sneered as he publicly banned me. The poor kid who dared to outswim his star athlete. He called me a safety hazard, but his eyes screamed, unworthy. The shame burned hotter than the California sun. That very humiliation drove me back into the water at dawn, into a treacherous rocky channel few would ever risk. And there, tucked deep inside a kelp-choked underwater cave, I saw it. A heavy, dark green glass bottle, sealed with black wax and crusted with centuries of the ocean's secrets. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Would you have had the courage to grab it? Let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe, because you won't believe what that bottle held. My name is Caleb Vance. Cal, to the few people who bother to know me. I'm 28 years old, and for as long as I can remember, the ocean has been my only real home. I don't mean that in some poetic, romantic way. I mean it literally. I live in a cramped third-floor apartment a few blocks from the coast, where the paint peels from the walls in time with the damp, salty air, and the windows are permanently fogged with sea spray. But the moment I hit the water, none of that matters. The cold shock of the Pacific, the rhythmic pull of the current, the silence beneath the waves, that's where I'm not just some poor kid from the wrong side of the boulevard. Out there, I'm powerful. I'm free. But you can't live in the water. Sooner or later, you have to come out. And that's when the world reminds you exactly who you are. And for me, that reminder usually has a name. Marcus Thorne. He's the kind of man who was born on third base and thinks he hit a triple. His family has run the La Jolla Swim Club for generations, turning a piece of public coastline into their own private kingdom. He glides through life with an effortless arrogance, his skin tanned from years of leisure, not labor. And for some reason, my very existence seems to offend him. It wasn't just that one time he called me a vagrant in front of everyone. That was just the crescendo of a symphony of slights I'd been enduring for years. I remember once I was sitting on the public pier just watching the charter boats come in, my feet dangling over the edge. Thorne walked by with a group of his club members, all of them in crisp linen shirts. He didn't look at me, but he pitched his voice just loud enough for me to hear. "It's a shame," he said, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "This used to be such an exclusive area. Now the loiterers are getting bold." His friends chuckled. I just stared at the horizon, my knuckles white as I gripped the sun-bleached wood of the pier. I felt like a ghost and a target all at once. Another time, I had saved up for months to replace my wetsuit. My old one was a patchwork of neoprene glue and hope, with seams so worn they let the cold water seep right in. I finally found a decent one on clearance, and I felt proud coming out of the water in it. Thorne was standing near the showers with some dignitary from the city. He saw me, looked me up and down, and then leaned over to his guest. "You have to be careful with your things around here," he murmured again, just loud enough. "You'd be surprised what washes up on shore." The implication was clear. I couldn't possibly have afforded it. I must have stolen it. The shame was a physical thing, a hot flush that crawled up my neck, worse than the cold water I'd just left. He never spoke to me directly. He didn't have to. His power was in making me feel like an object, a piece of driftwood that had fouled his perfect beach. He poisoned the one place I felt whole. The worst part was his reach. I tried to get a job at the marina, cleaning boats. It was hard work, but it was honest, and it was near the water. I thought I had it. The harbor master seemed to like me. He could see I knew my way around the water. Then, a few days later, I got the call. The position had been filled. I later heard from one of the old fishermen that Thorne had put in a call. Said I was unreliable, not the kind of person you want around $1 million yacht. He was systematically closing every door, ensuring I stayed exactly where he thought I belonged, in the dirt, looking up at his world. So that day, the day he publicly banned me from the cove, wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of war. He was trying to take the last thing I had. So the next morning, the humiliation was still a raw, open wound. I hadn't slept. His word, vagrant, echoed in my head. I couldn't stay in my tiny apartment. I couldn't walk the streets. The only place I could go was the ocean. It was well before dawn, the sky a bruised purple, the air sharp and cold. The club members wouldn't be out for hours, but I didn't go to the main cove. I went to the North Point, to a place they all avoided. A treacherous, rocky channel known for its violent currents and jagged, hidden formations. The locals called it the blender. It was a place you didn't swim for leisure. You swam it to survive. It felt fitting. If Thorne wanted me out of his safe, manicured paradise, then I would conquer the part of the ocean that he and his pampered athletes were terrified of. I dove into the churning, icy water. The shock was immediate, driving the air from my lungs. The current grabbed me instantly, pulling me toward the rocks. This was a different kind of swimming. It wasn't about speed or grace. It was about power and instinct, reading the surge, using its own force to navigate the maze of stone. For 20 minutes, it was a battle. My muscles screamed, my lungs burned, and the cold was a constant aching pressure. I was exhausted, but I was also alive in a way I hadn't been the day before. I felt like I was washing his words, his judgment, right off my skin. I found a small inlet, a tiny underwater cave carved out of the cliff face, to rest for a moment. The water inside was calmer, sheltered from the main current. The kelp forest was thick, the long green fronds swaying like curtains in a hidden room. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. It was just a flicker, a glint of light from deep within the kelp bed that didn't belong. It wasn't the silvery flash of a fish or the pearly sheen of a shell. It was a deep, bottle green glint, something man-made, and it seemed to absorb the faint pre-dawn light rather than just reflect it. My heart started pounding for a different reason. It was probably just trash, an old bottle wedged in the rocks, but something, a deep primal intuition, told me it wasn't. It was wedged deep, almost completely hidden. Every rational thought told me to leave it, to save my energy for the swim back. But my instincts were screaming. What would you have done? Would you have had the courage to swim deeper into that darkness to investigate? Let me know in the comments, and make sure you subscribe, because what I pulled from that kelp bed wasn't just a bottle. It was a key to a past that was about to change my future forever. I floated there for a moment, suspended between the urge to flee and an overpowering, irrational pull toward that glint of dark green. My lungs were starting to ache, a familiar signal to head for the surface. Every rational part of my brain, the part that had learned to keep my head down and expect nothing, screamed at me to turn back. It's just trash, Cal. An old wine bottle from some rich guy's yacht, tossed overboard decades ago. Go home, lick your wounds. Don't waste your last reserves of energy on a piece of garbage. But my gut, the part of me that knew the currents and the moods of the ocean better than I knew myself, was telling me something different. It wasn't the kind of glint trash gives off. Trash is dull, defeated by the sea. This was a deep, defiant light, like an emerald holding its breath in the dark. Thorne's voice echoed in my head. Vagrant. Worthless. The word fueled me. What did I have to lose? My pride was already gone. My energy was a small price to pay for what? I didn't know. And that was the most compelling part. I took one last, deep breath from the small pocket of air in the cave, held it, and kicked down, deeper into the narrow space. The water pressure increased immediately, a dull throb in my ears. The kelp wasn't just swaying anymore. It felt like it was grabbing at me, slick, cold fingers trying to hold me in place, trying to protect its secret. The faint light from the cave entrance faded behind me, and I was swimming into near-total darkness, guided only by the memory of where I'd seen the glint. It was a stupid risk, a fatal risk. If my leg got tangled, if I misjudged my air, no one would ever find me here. They'd just assume the blender had finally claimed another victim. Another piece of driftwood washed away. The thought was both terrifying and strangely freeing. Here, in the crushing dark, Marcus Thorne and his world of judgment couldn't reach me. It was just me and the ocean. My outstretched hand brushed against something solid and unyielding. Rock. I felt my way along the jagged surface, my fingers, numb with cold, scraping against rock and shell. And then I felt it. Glass. It was smooth in some places, but mostly covered in a rough, calcified layer of barnacles and sea life. It was wedged tight in a crevice, held fast by years, maybe centuries, of the ocean's patient work. I tried to get a grip, but my fingers kept slipping. The bottle was thicker, heavier than I expected. It wasn't just wedged. It felt fused to the rock, like the ocean itself had made it part of the cliff. My lungs were on fire now, screaming for release. A panic started to creep into the edges of my vision, a sparkling, shimmering darkness that threatened to consume me. I had to go. Now. But I couldn't. I couldn't leave it. It felt like I was being tested. It felt like the one thing in my life that wasn't about what someone else thought of me, but about what I was willing to do. I braced my feet against the opposite wall of the crevice, giving myself leverage. I wrapped both hands around the bottle's neck, the sharp edges of the barnacles digging into my palms. I ignored the pain. I ignored the desperate pulsing in my temples. I pulled. Nothing. It didn't budge. I let out a stream of precious air in frustration, the bubbles rushing past my face. I readjusted my grip, found a better angle, and pulled again, this time with every ounce of strength I had left. My back and shoulders screamed in protest. The muscles in my arms felt like they were tearing. With a final, desperate heave that sent a jolt of pain up my arm, it came free. The sound wasn't loud, just a deep, grating groan that vibrated through the water and into my bones as it scraped against the rock. The bottle was suddenly free, and its weight was immense, almost pulling me down. I kicked hard, scrambling my way back through the clinging kelp, my vision tunneling, my body screaming for oxygen. I swam with a primal desperation I hadn't felt since I was a kid caught in a riptide. For a few terrifying seconds I thought I was lost, disoriented in the dark. Then I saw it, the faint, ghostly glow of the cave entrance. I propelled myself toward it, my prize clutched to my chest like a shield. I broke the surface with a desperate gasp, the cold air a shock to my lungs, but I barely noticed. I was treading water, my breath coming in ragged heaves, my eyes locked on what I held in my hands. It wasn't a modern bottle. This was old, ancient even. The glass was a dark, murky green, so thick you couldn't see through it. It was hand-blown. You could see the imperfections, the slight wobble in the glass that spoke of a time before machines. It was crusted with the history of the seafloor. But the most incredible thing was the seal. The wax was thick, black, and completely unbroken, stamped with a sigil I couldn't make out in the dim light. Something intricate and strange. Whatever was inside had been trapped there for a very, very long time. It felt like I was holding a captured secret, a piece of history that had been waiting in the dark for someone stubborn or stupid enough to find it. The seal was ancient, unbroken. The question wasn't just what was in it, but what would happen once it was out. It felt dangerous. It felt like a choice to open a door you could never close again. Would you have had the courage to pull this out of the darkness? To break a seal that old? Let me know in the comments and hit that subscribe button, because the moment I got this thing back to my apartment, the world as I knew it, it was about to end. Getting the bottle back to my apartment was a mission in itself. I half swam, half crawled out of the churning water of the blender, my muscles screaming, my hands raw and bleeding from the barnacles. I wrapped the heavy bottle in my worn towel, holding it against my chest like a newborn child. Every shadow on the walk home felt like a threat. I felt watched, exposed. It was irrational, I know. No one could possibly know what I had. But the weight of it, the sheer ancient presence of the thing, felt like it was broadcasting a signal to the world. Back in my small room, with the peeling paint and the constant smell of salt and damp, I placed it on my rickety kitchen table. It looked like an alien artifact, a piece of a forgotten world sitting in the middle of my poverty. It was magnificent and terrifying. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the knife. The black wax seal was as hard as stone, fused to the glass over centuries. It wasn't just wax, it was a declaration, a promise that whatever was inside was meant to stay inside. For a moment I hesitated. What if I was meant to leave it alone? What if opening this was like opening Pandora's box? But then Thorne's sneering face flashed in my mind. Vagrant! The word was a spur driving me on. I took a deep breath and started to chip away at the edge of the seal with the tip of my sharpest knife. It was slow, painstaking work. Tiny black flakes of ancient wax fell onto the table. After what felt like an hour, I had managed to break the bond around the cork. The cork itself was swollen, dark, and wedged impossibly tight. I had no corkscrew. I ended up using a pair of pliers, twisting and pulling, my knuckles white with the strain. Finally, with a deep, resonant thump that seemed to suck the air out of the room, the cork came free. The smell that hit me was immediate and overwhelming. It wasn't the smell of decay. It was the smell of history itself, the clean, sharp scent of old parchment, the faint, waxy aroma of oilskin, and beneath it all, the deep, briny ghost of the ocean it had been sleeping in. It was the smell of a secret finally breathing again. I carefully tilted the bottle, and a small, dark pouch slid out onto my palm. It was heavier than it looked, made of a thick, oiled leather that was still miraculously supple and waterproof. My heart was a drum against my ribs. My fingers fumbled with the simple leather tie holding it shut. I untied it and tipped the contents onto the table. Two things fell out. The first was a small, tightly rolled piece of parchment, yellowed with age but perfectly preserved. The second was a single folded sheet of paper, thicker and whiter, that looked like a page torn from a ship's ledger. I unrolled the parchment first. My breath caught in my throat. It was a map, a hand-drawn chart of La Jolla Cove, but a version of it I had never seen. The coastline was familiar, yet alien. Landmarks were marked with spidery, archaic script, names I didn't recognize. Scripps Pier was just an unnamed stretch of empty sand. The cliffs were drawn with an artist's care, but certain coves and rock formations were subtly different, shifted by centuries of wind and water. It was a ghost of the place I called home. Then I unfolded the ledger page. The handwriting was elegant but faded, the ink a rusty brown. There were columns of numbers and notes, but my eyes were drawn to a single entry at the bottom, circled twice. It was a series of coordinates, longitude and latitude, followed by a short, cryptic note, final consignment, safe from the Crown's reach. And then, below it, was a number so large, so impossible, that I laughed out loud, a hollow, disbelieving sound that echoed in my tiny apartment. It read, $180,000, $180 million. I stared at it. I read it again and again. It had to be a mistake, a joke, a cruel, elaborate prank left by some rich kid decades ago. But the bottle, the map, the oilskin, this was no joke. This was real. This was a treasure map, a ledger from a smuggler, a privateer, maybe even a pirate, from a time when this coastline was the wild frontier. This wasn't just a fortune. It was a hidden history, a secret buried right under the noses of men like Marcus Thorne for generations. The thought hit me like a physical blow. $180 million. The number danced in front of my eyes, rewriting my entire existence. It was more money than Thorne's entire family was worth. It was a sum that could buy the La Jolla Swim Club and turn it into a public park. It was the kind of money that didn't just change your life, it changed the world around you. A few days later, I walked down to the cove. I didn't go to swim. I just went to watch. I stood on the public walkway, the place where he had humiliated me. And of course, he was there, Marcus Thorne, holding court with some of his club members, laughing, radiating that effortless, unearned superiority. He saw me. His eyes narrowed, the familiar sneer starting to form on his lips. He was probably expecting me to look away, to shrink, to disappear like I always did. But I didn't. I just stood there, the secret of the bottle burning inside me like a star. I held his gaze, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who looked away. He did. He saw something in my eyes he didn't recognize. Not fear, not shame. It was a quiet, unshakable confidence he couldn't comprehend. He faltered for a second, his smile tightening. He didn't know why, but he knew in that instant that the power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the vagrant. I was the man with a $180 million secret, and he was just a clueless king sitting on a stolen throne. I had the map. I had the coordinates. All I had to do was solve the puzzle. What would you do if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments and subscribe, because figuring out this map would lead me into a danger I could never have imagined. That quiet confidence I felt, holding Thorne's gaze on the walkway, was just the beginning. It was one thing to hold a secret. It was another thing entirely to turn it into reality. The map and the ledger page became my obsession. I spent every waking moment in the local library's history section, cross-referencing old sea charts, reading about shipping routes, trying to decipher the archaic handwriting. But I was an amateur, a swimmer, not a historian. I knew I needed an expert, but who could I trust? The paranoia was suffocating. Every person I considered felt like a potential thief. The world I came from taught me that people with power take things from people like me. Now I held all the power, but I still had the mindset of the powerless. Finally, I found him. Not through some high-tech search, but through an old fisherman at the pier who'd heard me asking questions. He told me about a man named Alistair Finch, a retired maritime historian from Scripps Institution of Oceanography, a recluse who lived in a small cottage crammed with more books than furniture. I met him on a foggy morning. He had sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to look right through you. I didn't show him the ledger with the dollar amount. I just showed him the map. I watched his face as he unrolled the delicate parchment. He was silent for a long time, his fingers tracing the ghost coastline. He used a magnifying glass, muttering to himself about watermarks and ink composition. Then he whispered, "This isn't a copy. This is real. Late 18th century. Spanish influence, but the script is English. A privateer, perhaps." My heart hammered against my ribs. When I finally showed him the ledger page, he just stared at it. His academic composure crumbled. Final consignment, safe from the Crown's reach. He read it aloud, his voice trembling slightly. He looked up at me, his eyes wide. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "do you have any idea what this is pointing to?" It wasn't just treasure. It was a lost piece of history, a transaction that had vanished from all records. The coordinates on the ledger, when adjusted for 2 centuries of magnetic declination, didn't point to a shipwreck. They pointed to a specific deep-water cavern system, accessible only during a rare tidal event just a few miles offshore. The consignment wasn't lost. It was hidden, intentionally. Through Alistair's discreet connections, we approached a private consortium of historical preservationists and investors. They were skeptical at first, but the evidence was undeniable. They organized a deep-sea survey. I was there on the boat, watching the remote submarine's camera feed on a monitor. I watched as it slipped into the underwater cavern described by the coordinates. And there it was. Not a pile of gold coins, but dozens of heavy lead-lined chests, perfectly preserved in the cold, dark water. The contents were even more staggering than the ledger suggested. Bearer bonds from the fledgling United States government, rare colonial currencies, and historical documents of immeasurable value, all belonging to a shadowy financier who had seemingly vanished while playing both sides of the Revolutionary War. The consortium paid me for the exclusive rights to the location and its contents. They took on the risk of recovery and authentication. My payment was a wire transfer. The money didn't arrive with a thunderclap. It arrived silently, as a single line of text in a banking app on my cheap phone. It was a number so long it looked like a typo. $180 million. The price of a ghost. My life didn't just change, it was reborn. The first thing I did was buy the cliffside, the entire stretch of coastal property overlooking La Jolla Cove. My house is there now, a quiet, modern place of glass and stone, built where a dilapidated old fish shack used to be. My front window looks directly down on the pristine sand and the manicured lawns of the La Jolla Swim Club. I see it every morning when I wake up. I see Marcus Thorne's kingdom, and I know that I could buy it, tear it down, and turn it into a public park with a single phone call. I never did. That would be his kind of power. Mine is different. I saw him a few months ago. It was at a local charity gala for ocean conservation, an event I was now a primary benefactor of. He was there, schmoozing, holding his glass of champagne, the king in his court. He didn't recognize me at first. I was in a tailored suit, not a patched wetsuit. Then our eyes met across the room. I watched the recognition dawn, followed by confusion, and then a dawning, sickening horror as the host of the event walked over to me, shook my hand, and thanked me profusely for my 7-figure donation. Thorne's face went pale. Later, he cornered me by the terrace. He had that slick, predatory smile plastered on his face, but his eyes were filled with a desperate panic. "Vance, Caleb, I heard you came into some good fortune," he said, his voice too loud. "We should talk. The club is always looking for new patrons." He extended his hand. I just looked at it, this hand that had pointed at me while he called me a vagrant. Then I looked him straight in the eye. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I just held his gaze for a second, then turned and walked away, leaving him standing there with his hand outstretched to no one. The silence, the complete and utter dismissal, was more devastating to him than any insult I could have ever spoken. In that moment, he wasn't the president of an exclusive club. He was just a small man who realized the driftwood that washed up on his beach now owned the entire coastline. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night, looking out at the dark ocean from my wall of glass. The money, the house, the revenge. It's all noise. The real story is the mystery. Alistair Finch, my historian friend, confirmed it. The ship mentioned in the ledger, the Sea Serpent, doesn't exist in any known maritime record. The intricate seal on the bottle's wax belongs to no known family, company, or crown. It's a ghost ship, a ghost fortune. Why was it there? Hidden so cleverly, so close to shore. Why did I find it? In that one specific cave, on that one specific day, in my moment of deepest humiliation. Was it just a 1 in a billion coincidence? Or was the ocean, my only true home, giving something back to the one person who knew its secrets? Was it a reward? A test? I have all the money in the world, but I don't have the one answer I truly want. And sometimes I wonder, was that bottle the only one? So what do you think? Do you believe a turnaround like this is even possible? What's your theory on where that bottle and its impossible fortune really came from? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want to hear more about the strange things I'm starting to uncover about this mystery, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Let me know where you're watching from. It's incredible to see how far a story that started in a dark, cold cave can travel.